From training to performing, join our big league conversation. Welcome to the CSP Elite Baseball Development Podcast with your host, Eric Cressey.
Welcome back to the CSP Elite Baseball Development Podcast. I'm your host, Eric Cressey, and this is episode 102. We're actually going in roundtable format. I'm joined by a couple of friends, long toss expert Alan Jaeger, as well as the pitching ninja Rob Friedman, who kind of moderated this discussion. What we're covering is a roundtable really on the topic of reconditioning. So there's always this period of time after you get through a return to throwing program following an injury, where you actually have to work on getting back to peak performance, right? So it's not just enough to be healthy. You also have to get back to a point where your velocity is where it needs to be, your work capacity is where it needs to be, and obviously the shape of pitches has to be good too. And I think this is something that gets really overlooked, in both the rehabilitation and pitching community, and certainly strength and conditioning being part of that discussion as well. Been involved in these discussions a lot over the years, and I think Alan really has worn this on his sleeve and really brought it to the forefront as an important discussion topic as we work backwards. From performance, we have to realize there's a big step between the interval throwing program as well as the return to function. So that's what we're going to cover today. A really good discussion that I enjoyed a lot, so I'm sure you'll like it too. This episode is brought to you by Athletic Greens, the most comprehensive NSF certified for sport daily nutritional supplement I've ever tried. With so many stressors in life, it's difficult to maintain effective nutritional habits and give our bodies the nutrients they need to thrive. As a father of 3 young kids and a co-founder of multiple businesses in multiple states, on top of still being an avid exerciser, I know that busy schedules can really take their toll on us. Whether it's poor sleep, exercise or life stressors, environmental factors, or simply not eating enough of the right foods, we can wind up deficient nutritionally. This is where Athletic Greens can really help. It's a game-changing nutritional insurance policy. They simplify the logistics of getting optimal nutrition on a daily basis by giving you just one thing with all the best things. And that's why I use it daily and recommend it to our athletes. 1 scoop of Athletic Greens contains 75 vitamins, minerals, and whole food sourced ingredients, including a multivitamin, multi-mineral, probiotic, green superfood blend, and more. They work together to fill the nutritional gaps in your diet, increase energy and focus, aid in digestion, recovery, and supporting of a healthy immune system. This all can happen without taking multiple products. While most nutritional products come to market and stay stagnant, Athletic Greens continues to obsessively improve this one holistic formula based on the latest research, producing 53 improvements over the last decade. They invest in the most absorbable and natural source of each ingredient and go above and beyond in third-party testing to ensure their customers continue to receive the highest quality and best daily nutritional habit on the planet. It's lifestyle friendly, whether you're keto, paleo, vegan, dairy-free, or gluten-free, and contains less than 1 gram of sugar without compromising on taste. They put 75 ingredients through the NSF for Sport certification to come up with a formula that's trusted by some of the world's best athletes, including our own. Right now, Athletic Greens is giving our listeners 10 free travel packets with their subscription. Simply go to athleticgreens.com/Cressey to receive my offer. These travel packs are perfect for supporting your immune system, energy, and gut health when you're traveling for games, training, or simply when you're on the go. They can be a great counterbalance to less than ideal on-the-road food options. So if you want to bridge the gap between deficient and optimal and give yourself the best chance to get nutrient diversity, then head to athleticgreens.com/Cressey and get your 10 free travel packets today. Again, that's athleticgreens.com/Cressey, CRESSEY.
Hey everybody, I am here with 2 of my good friends, Eric Cressey from Cressey Sports Performance and with the New York Yankees, and Alan Jaeger with Jaeger Sports, Mr. Long Toss, Mental Game, all that fun stuff. 2 experts in the field, and we're here to talk about return to throwing and rehab programs and kind of common misconceptions, state of the art, and maybe things that kind of old school that maybe need to be updated. Hey guys, how are you?
What's up, Rob?
What's up, man?
Was that a good enough intro for you? I mean, I didn't.
That's it.
Okay.
That was stellar. No need to cut it out. We're good.
All right. Good deal. So what do you think, what do people get wrong today? Like, just a simple question. What is the biggest thing that you feel like return to throwing gets wrong today?
Take it, Alan.
I'm looking right at you, Alan.
I was punting to you. Well, first of all, Rob, thanks for having us on. EC, thanks for doing this, brother, man. This is awesome. No, look, I wrote an article called The Origin of the 120-Foot Program. Eric actually helped as part of that like 10 years ago. And I just felt like I wanted to do my homework on this because I had a very strong inclination of what the rehab program actually was and how it came about. I interviewed Dr. Yoakum in person, who was just an angel. I talked to Kevin Wilk at ASMI, a good friend of mine, Dr. Marcus Elliott, Stan Conte. Long story short is I did a lot of research because I wanted to hear what they had to say. And they pretty much confirmed what I knew or felt strongly about, which is the 120-foot throwing rehab program was really built both by the Curl and Joe group on the West Coast and the Dr. Andrews group more toward the East. And they brought in the room some medical people, PTs, baseball people, and they kind of put a program together, understandably so, probably, and Eric would know more than I would about this, but I would assume protocols based on other forms of rehab. And I think overall, even though the program is essentially 40 plus years old, they actually did a really good job of what's called the ITP, the interval throwing program. My main thing is this. That ITP, let's say it's 6 weeks, 8 weeks, might be longer depending upon if it was a surgery. I'm fine generally. I still have a little bit of some issues with it, but for the most part, I'm okay with the fact that get them out to 120 or 150 really conservatively. I think they do a good job of, monitoring it. My main piece is this: when it's technically done at 120 or 150, in some cases 180, there's a few, I'm sure, progressive doctors that might go further. My whole piece is that you're still 3 to 4 weeks away. If you're an older player, let's say a high schooler, especially a college player and up, you're basically 3 or 4 more weeks away now from getting in shape, because you still have to now break sort of that linear kind of, let's call it robotic kind of format that you were put in to stay anatomically, let's say, correct. 150 compared to, let's say, someone that gets out to 300 feet is 50% of the normal distance. So now you have to navigate that, let's call it that next piece, where in that next piece, by the way, you get more range of motion because you're throwing the ball higher and higher. You build more volume because you're throwing the ball further and further. And then the other big piece is athleticism. And again, this is something I can't wait for Eric to comment on, but I just feel like if you're in a linear 120 program that you've been in for 8 weeks or whatever it is, that's a long time. You're repeating a lot of, let's say, non-variant, or is that a word? Non-variant, let's say a lack of variance for a long period of time. And we're so into athleticism and freedom and inherent movements and differential learning, all the stuff that we want to happen intuitively. And I just feel like that piece is also majorly missing. So in a nutshell, that's my opening. I just feel like and I write this in the article, the end of the rehab or the ITP is really the beginning of your throwing program and progression, unless you're maybe a 12-year-old or a 13-year-old that your pre-long toss distance was 150 feet. I'd still say even for them, they need a week or two to stretch out and free up the athlete and build some volume. But that's sort of my main takeaway. Eric?
Yeah, I think you certainly nailed it. There's probably some trends in a good direction in certain ways on this. I think historically in the past, a lot of people would say Tommy Johns are a year, right? Until you're back to like being in games. And we know, just from what we understand in the sports medicine world, like you're asking a tendon to become a ligament. So that process is going to take quite a bit of time, depending on the research study you look at, whether it's, an ACL research study or whatever it is, that may be about 18 months. But what we've actually realized is that the average tends to be about 14 months on that. And you look at like a Lance Lynn. Lance came back from Tommy John in like 9 months and change. Strasburg back in the day was 11 months. They're probably throwing in scenarios where they were willing to take on more risk at the time just because we didn't know. And I spoke with Dr. Jeff Dugas about this on my podcast, and he commented that, it's 14 months, but there's kind of like a plus or minus 6 to 8 weeks standard deviation on that. Some guys are going to come back faster. They're going to be great healers. They're going to figure it out. Maybe it's guys that are more comfortable in their delivery. And there are going to be some that take, closer to, 16, 17 months for whatever reason. We have a lot of variability in terms of how those surgeries are done, whether it's a graft from their leg, a graft from their forearm? Do they have a nerve that's moved? Do they have a bone spur removed? There's all these different things. So when I hear Alan kind of talking about it, yes, I think things are trending in the right direction, just to some degree, in terms of people understanding the reconditioning aspect of throwing programs. But I think what it also is, it's part of maybe a more favorable overall trend of increased individualization, understanding that some guys want to throw to 300, some guys want to throw to 180, and we've got to listen to them. We've got to give them a voice in the table because one, they know what works best for them way better than we ever could. And two, they're going to be more invested on the programs that we put in place if they have a say in them, if they have an active role in designing those programs and obviously executing them.
So for me, where did the distances come from? So like I can throw 120 feet and I can throw 120 feet slow. I can just lob it over or I can gun it. And to me, the distance isn't necessarily the gating thing anyway. Like I can throw very hard or very soft to 120 feet. Why is it just the need for standardization, the need for incrementalization, like getting back to throwing, and that's just the numbers they threw out there? Was there a study done on that? Like, how did that ever come up?
Well, again, I think Eric's going to have more insight than that. I can tell you from my research and the interviews I did, and this was straight from Dr. Yoakum, I believe. He said that they all, and again, I'm just projecting that they were based on models of other forms of rehabilitation, right? Knee surgery from skiers or whatever. But they brought, and maybe I should only speak on behalf of Curlin and Job at the time, but they brought together what they thought were a team of experts in the field, whether it was a strength and conditioning, PTs, medical, and baseball people. And I think they sort of came up with a program that they thought made sense. And the increments, and this again is more for Eric, and that's another thing, by the way, I've never understood about the incremental part of this is even if sometimes it goes 60, 90, 120, I know early on it probably goes more like 45, 60, 75, 90. But my whole thing is you might make 10 throws at 45, 10 throws at 60, 10 throws at 60. I've never understood that. Our program is based on inches, meaning if you make a throw and your arm feels like it opened up a little bit, you move back a foot and you make another throw, or maybe you move back 2 feet or 3 feet. And so this idea of going, from 15 feet to 15 feet to 15 feet, just sort of going back to your question. Also, to me, I don't understand. So even when they come up with this program, that's part of how they come up with it, is they got a group of people together. But I don't understand even the incremental piece, because again, I would think you would want to gradually stretch anything out, inch by inch, not in 15-foot increments. But Eric, what is your, I guess, take on all of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is, fair or not, an element of kind of anti-long toss sentiment, I think, in the orthopedic community. A lot of it's based on some research that suggests that valgus stress at the elbow does tend to increase, as we get out to, 180 feet. And so the concern is, do we want to expose, a new ligament that's been reconstructed to that level of valgus stress? Maybe there's, some credibility to that perspective early on, but I would also argue that, this has been applied to, basically posterior spur removals, to shoulder surgeries, to a lot of thoracic outlet, all these other things. So I don't think we should, shy away from stress. Stress is what builds resilience. And I think there's 2 general maybe principles in play in the sports medicine community. Really, I'd say even the sports science community have some competing demands. Like we have this world of load management, right? Is that, everybody's about to break. We need to protect them from that. And at the other end of the spectrum, we have, basically folks that are all about like push, build this robust athlete with a high level of work capacity and tissue resilience. And if you build that buffer high enough, you won't break as easily. And we both know the answer is very much in the middle, right? You have to develop fitness. You need to, develop, musculoskeletal integrity to protect you. But at the same time, like Major League Baseball players are playing 200 games in 230 days. Like they need days off in there. They need a chance to have a little bit of a deload. And we see some of the best pitchers on the planet, skipping a bullpen or, just pulling back a little bit on their throwing programs, after 15 starts. Or, I remember Corey Kluber telling me in 2014, he threw, I want to say it was like 235 innings during his Cy Young year. And he stopped sprinting with like a month left in the season. He's like, we just kicked the soccer ball around. He's like, it was just, I was beating my body up so much. And it was an awesome pivot for him that made a big difference as he hit that workload for the first time. So I think there's, we have to remember that not everybody can just become delicate little flowers. We have to challenge athletes. We need to build up, a level of durability that is going to support them, over the long haul.
And Eric, sorry, Rob, I just real quick, if I can throw one thing out there, because this is a big point for me as well. When they get to this 180, and I know about the valgus torque, and it's funny because Stan Conte, when I interviewed him for the article, said, well, I would expect that we want that. That's part of the growth, if you will. But here's the other irony. If you protect them at 180 because of valgus torque, because of arc or angle, and you keep them again in what I would call more that linear robotic world, but that athlete at some point is going to be getting on a mound throwing with full intent, right? So we haven't introduced, again, this variance. If that athlete at some point, even if it's a month later, starts going back to long toss at 300 feet and stretching it out and creating these new angles anyway, that's where he wants to go anyway. And we didn't take care of that on the front end. That to me is another massive danger. What you've done is because you've not introduced the stressors or the need of what that arm needs to do. And as Eric said, we almost think of it more like, so the great Lance Wheeler line, it's protection versus growth. We're so worried about protecting, and I get it to a degree. That's why you did the 10 weeks as slowly as you did. But we're not far according to the 120 or the normal rehab protocols, once you finish that 120 to 180, whatever it is, you're integrating mound work pretty soon after with intent. And so if you're going to be throwing with full intent anyway, why are we not going there earlier on? And that's where, again, I like that 3 to 4 week window to start massaging and doing some things to introduce some of these other parts of the arm that are going to be neglected by just going straight from 120 to 180 and onto the mound.
If we look at the classic Tommy John throwing programs, like we've seen professional players who were willing to risk it, similar to an NFL player who comes back at 6 months after an ACL, like his incidence of re-rupture goes sky high. But we've seen players who have come back from Tommy John at 9 months and risked it, 9 months and change to throw in minor league games or whatever it is. So clearly they're ready to handle, in their eyes, the stress of throwing off a mound, but that's still 5 months away from the average. So the question then becomes hey, why do we have to go either or? Why do we have to say, bullpens and, game work and, throwing out to 120, whatever it is? Why can't we have the best of both worlds? Why can't we be off the mound once a week and build some long toss on some other days where we test the integrity of the repair, and certainly get them comfortable with the slope. But at the same time, we do work to recondition, because that 5 months in the middle, it's a lot of time to get some quality work in. And that's, to be honest, kind of where we've made our money is, we followed the programs to basically guarantee that, the elbow is where it needs to be, or whatever, joint it is. We checked all the important boxes, and then we've had candid conversations with pitchers about, how do you feel? Are you close to where you want to be? Do you feel electric? Is it making you enthusiastic to pick up a baseball and go out and get it? Or do you just feel like your arms moving slowly? Or, and more often than not, they've changed their body during the rehab. They've, thrown the med ball, they've sprinted, they've changed direction, they've lifted heavy stuff, they've put on 15 pounds, they've gotten leaner. So they often feel really, really good. So you have to make some calls on what, is the body where it needs to be and the arm not, or what's going on.
Do you feel that this is more of an art or a science? Because I think when we're looking at, 120, 150, 180, that seems to be scientifically, we've done this study and we've proven this. What we're all talking about here is the art part, the between the lines, what does the athlete feel? How is the athlete healing? What is the athlete's goal? How does he move? Like, everybody's individual, but yet we have these hard, fast numbers that are drilled into people's heads. So what is the tension there?
I would say an orthopedic surgeon's job is to make sure that you're fixed, not that you're highly prepared to pitch at a competitive level. Their job, I'll give you probably the best example. A surgery that has become more common used to be just like a general pop surgery. I saw the first one in Major League history. It was Kurt Schilling in 2009. It was a biceps tenodesis. So what happens is when you have a labral tear, a lot of labral repairs don't work because they reattach a degenerative biceps tendon to the top of your shoulder. So what they do is they basically snip the biceps tendon and they attach it lower down. So you no longer have a biceps tendon that crosses the front of your shoulder. And it's all well in theory, right? it makes sense. Like you lose a little bit of active stability at your shoulder, you get your cuff strong, you can make up the difference. There are complications with it, right? We've seen some, humeral fractures from where they put the pin in to attach the new biceps. But what's also interesting is we see a lot of players who come back from this, and in spite of the fact that they don't have shoulder pain anymore, in many cases, they tighten that shoulder up as part of the procedure, right? The capsule is a little bit tight, so they lose external rotation. So what very commonly happens when you have someone who has a biceps tenodesis, their shoulder's great and they blow out an elbow 8 to 9 months later, right? Because they're just trying so hard to get their arm back. And this, you'll see this with capsule repairs and all that. So the joint that was the initial reason for the surgical intervention just, basically wasn't a problem. It was structurally sound and all that, but it became a limiting factor for, an adjacent joint to kind of pay the price. So I don't necessarily think it's the job of the surgeon to say when, you're healthy full body wide to go out there and pitch again. So I think that's something where, the rehabilitation professionals, the associated pitching coaches, and obviously the player himself has to all be part of that discussion. Like, are you ready to go back and compete at a high level?
I think that's hard because you're used to deferring to medical professionals on stuff. Like everybody is. When you hear a doctor who's trained in whatever, like the average person is sitting there going, it'll be very deferential typically. Oh, well, this is the way I have to do it. And it seems to be a misalignment between what a doctor is good at and what a strength and conditioning guy is good at, or what a rehab coach is good at, and all that.
Yeah. I don't think this is a knock on doctors in any way.
It's not.
It's to be like a parent, and to be honest, like I'm very fortunate in kind of like what we do. I get to talk to the best, orthopedic surgeons in the country pretty regularly, and they're actually amazing to work with. In terms of you can bounce ideas off them, and I think honestly that's what makes them amazing. Not just their clinical expertise, their accessibility, or their surgical skills. It's that they are open-minded to new research that's coming out, and they're at the same time, they have a close eye on what's happening anecdotally, what players are telling them, and what's working, what isn't, so that they can kind of strategically pivot. But we have great relationships with the doctors that we work with, and I think it's in part because we're not afraid to ask challenging questions, and they like hearing that because it is a sign that we're very invested in that athlete's care.
And I think that's as important of a question as you could have brought up, Rob, because it hits at the heart of issues I have. For instance, feel versus science. I mean, what a brilliant concept, right? I think what Eric was saying is, there's things that scientifically that you can follow and maybe part of it, or maybe a lot of it, but there's other areas that we have to take into consideration. One is feel. So I'm all for, and the idea of this authority figure, if you get a rehab program from Dr. Andrews or Dr. Alatrash, Dr. Meister, like this is a big deal. And I understand they've done a lot of work and deserve that credit. But in the mind of an athlete, whether you're a little leaguer or you're in the big leagues, you're going to tend to punt, obviously, to the expert, to the authority figure. And I think in a lot of cases, it's good. They've done the work, so to speak. However, this is a part of this discussion I hope is not lost on anybody ever going forward, which is your arm is attached to your body for a reason. It's not attached to anybody else's body. And you have done, especially if you're in the big leagues or you're in college, you have a lot of years behind you, even high school. You have a lot of years of training behind you. You know what works for you. So you're very intimate with how your body works. And this is a mind-body thing, not just a physical, obviously. And so to me, that's the piece that I want people to be aware of, is that, yes, get the protocols, follow them, but at some point you also have to listen to your instincts. And that's where this big word that came up in an article I just wrote comes up: collaboration, because it is part science and part feel. And I think what's happened is it's become almost all science, because the player feels, understandably so, why, if it's coming on the letterhead of Dr. Alatrash, and I understand this, they're going to follow it to a T. And I'm okay with that. But again, at some point, you have to take ownership too of your own feel and your own history. And going forward, there needs to be collaboration. And this is also on the side of medical. Medical has to also realize that, yes, we're the experts. We're giving you our program, but I'm going into this wide open to hearing what is your history? What is your experience? What feels right? What feels wrong? And I feel like that is a disconnect. I don't want to say disconnect, I'm blaming anybody. I don't mean that. I mean, it's just a natural order of how things I feel like have materialized. And I just want people to be aware that, hey, the throwing program, the ITP is great, but it's not the end. It's not the end of it. It's the beginning of it. It's the start of it. And just know that once that is done, it now becomes a feel thing for you, and it becomes a collaboration for both.
What's interesting too is I think it's very important to appreciate that what they're really doing with the throwing program is they're setting the floor. That's the foundation. It's like wearing seatbelts, right? It's don't do anything dumber than this for this allotment of time. And like, you have to really put yourself in the shoes of, Dr. Andrews or whoever is giving it out. Like, things started out in Birmingham, Alabama. You had a kid that would drive 4 hours to get a Tommy John surgery. He'd go back to the middle of nowhere to a town with no stoplights and no physical therapists. And he'd probably have to do some of that rehab on his own. So what did you do? You gave him the throwers 10, and you gave him, a collection of throwing program recommendations that, he couldn't get into trouble with. Like, it could kind of set the foundation. Those were written also before we had Motus sleeves and before we could track everything under the sun. And nowadays we have a lot more understanding, from Tim Gabbett's work on acute chronic workloads and things like that. It's like, being honest, like, the throwers 10 has been in every rehab program that's probably ever been given out to a player that's come our way. We've never done the throwers 10 as is, right? We've looked at the athlete in front of him and said, hey, you know what? This guy probably doesn't need prone horizontal abductions because he's in a really adducted posture. I think we're going to do better off driving more scapular upward rotation. It's an adjustment. You know what I mean? And those physicians, when you talk to them, they're wonderful about, hey, we trust you. You got a great rationale for why you want to do this. Again, they're just setting the foundation, and I think that's a really vitally important part. It's not that you shouldn't do these programs. You should probably follow them to a T and benefit from them. It's understanding what happens at the end of them. What do we need to do next? And where it gets more complex is when we have these shorter timelines, right? So the best example is, remember, every surgery is going to be categorized in one of two ways, or a combination of two. It's either going to be a repair or removal, right? So you get a repair. That's a labral repair, rotator cuff repair. It's a Tommy John surgery where there's UCL reconstruction, or it's going to be a removal, right? That might be a bone spur at the elbow or a loose body that's floating around, or, something like that. Generally, the people who have the removals come back a lot faster because there's really no biologics of healing, right? You wait for your sutures to come out, you get the swelling out of the joint, and everybody's happy, and you're playing catch before you know it. And those are the ones that sometimes are the trickiest, because there is a really accelerated throwing program after you have it. And people might get out over their skis a little bit too quickly, or people might not realize, like, oh my gosh, I had this and I've been throwing for 6 weeks, and they just didn't realize how quickly they detrained. It's not coming back as quickly as I can. So sometimes they can't find their delivery because they work back from it too quickly. There's a lot of variables there. And I just think that, the key point here is don't just rehabilitate, recondition as well.
And what's the rush?
Yeah, well, I think you made a really good point, but I don't think everybody has access to the Eric Cresseys of the world. So that is what doctors are trying to do, is give you the floor. But that doesn't mean that that's all there is. Like, we've all recognized that athletes are different. Some people heal better. Some people come back better. Some people, can get on the mound quicker. But to have this floor is important too. Like, you don't want to re-injure yourself. You want to make sure this thing can heal. The period of time to get back and be at full strength and throwing at full effort, though, you need to be very careful about that, because you could re-injure yourself in that period.
Yeah, no doubt about it. These are really, really hard, kind of discussions to have, just because it does take a lot of considerations, and every situation is entirely unique. And that's what people just don't necessarily appreciate. And, I honestly, I sympathize with a lot of doctors that have to deal with this, because I'll be honest, we see some really dumb stuff out there. Some guys that get pushed really, really quickly by people who just don't have a seat at the table. You've got to understand the biologics of healing, and, before you start to get too sexy with things.
Do you think is that coming from coaches or coming from the players usually? Like, is a coach or an organization trying to get them back quicker? Or is the player, players are competitive. They want to get back out there as quickly as possible. What's the bigger issue there?
Yeah, I don't say it's one or the other. I think there are probably different organizations in the way that they approach it. I'd say more often than not, it's the player. The player wants to move quickly. And, I remember it was actually a Kevin Wilt quote. I think he said, teenagers only have one speed, and that's stupidity. And I have a good friend who's an orthopedic surgeon up here in the Boston area. And we saw a kid that I did his evaluation. And it didn't look right. He had some proximal humeral discomfort. He's a 14-year-old kid. This is years ago. And so I referred him out. They did an x-ray, and sure enough, he had, pretty significant growth plate separation. It was a classic, like 12 to 16 weeks, you need to shut down. And, he basically said, shut down from, he basically said, shut down from everything. And I called him afterwards. I was like, hey man, he can come in here and work out. We can train his lower body. We can move his other side. And, we can even strengthen that arm. It's actually be good for it. He's like, I'd forgotten that he had come from you guys. He's like, the reason I say that is years ago, I had a kid come in with a growth plate injury. And, he asked if he could keep doing other stuff. And I said, yes, just stay away from throwing. And he went out and he took 150 slap shots, played street hockey in his backyard the next day. And he set his shoulder back by a month. And, in a moment like that, you realize like sometimes you have to protect people from themselves if they don't really have good people watching out for them.
Yep. Rob, if I can just throw out one other, he was lucky it was only a month, by the way. Just in this theme, I wrote this down earlier. What's the rush? Whether it's the player or the organization. And here's an example. And this is maybe more for major surgery, but still, let's say it takes 10 months to do everything right to the point that you finish the ITP, right? I mean, you've done it to a T. You've done it perfectly. You've worked so hard, blood, sweat, and tears. And then at the 10-month mark, you're at 150. And technically, let's say they want to start integrating mountain work and you're a few pens away from maybe alive. What's one more month to just hang out, as I love that term, recondition, get freed up from the kind of protocols and sort of those, incremental movements you've been on for 3 months or whatever. Just start to stretch out, get some range of motion, get some freedom, take the clock away, maybe just relax and recondition at your own pace. And that's where I keep coming back to this idea of the ITP marks the end of the ITP. It's the beginning of your throwing and your reconditioning. And so I want to just hammer that home. What is an extra 3 or 4 weeks based on 10 months or 11 months or 14 months or even 3 months? What's an extra 3 or 4 weeks just to I love this term, stack your base, free it up, get more athletic, get more free, get mentally more free, get more in tune with your body. What's an extra 3 or 4 weeks? Why are we rushing to get from 120 or 150 or whatever it is onto the mountain?
But I think ideally you're right. I think that's 100% true. There are pressures though on athletes that are different. Like, I mean, either from the team, from making the playoffs, they want to show that they're a good teammate. They just hate sitting around. Their contracts. I mean, they may be a contract year. They want to show they can throw. So like, I get it. Like every situation is somewhat different, but yeah, ideally you should listen to your body, it seems like, and do the right thing. I know there's competitive pressures that say otherwise to athletes.
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing, by the way, with any of those sentiments. I get it. Eric and I, as well as you, we've been around this our whole lives. Like, we know this is part of it. We're all competitive. If I turn my ankle a little bit and I got a tennis match tomorrow, it pains me to think of I'm going to cancel. I'm going to find a way to gut it out, and I might re-injure it, and I might set myself back a month because of it. Now, theoretically, I'm saying I won't, but I get it. Maybe I will. But I'm just saying, now we're talking about your career. And I understand, even if it's a contract year, even if you're a team that, if you can come back and make 2 or 3 starts, you might get a wild card. You might win a World Series. I get that. The trade-off is this. Do I want to possibly get that victory over the next month? Or do I want to salvage? Do I want to position myself to thrive for 10 years or 20 years? And that to me is the end game. We can say, someone might argue and say, no, I'd rather win a World Series and sacrifice 10 more years of my career. I'm good with that. And that's okay. That's their choice. But I want them to be crystal clear that if you're going to take this chance by rushing just 2 weeks out of your life or 4 weeks out of your life, if you're willing, it's not a fact, but if you're willing to potentially mortgage the rest of your career, whether you're 12, 16, 22, or 35, just know going into it that, in my opinion, you are tilting the table now percentage-wise to putting yourself in harm's way. Does it mean it's going to happen? No. I keep coming back to this point. What is 2, 3, 4 more weeks based on the rest of your career?
Do you trust athletes feel over, like generally how accurate is what an athlete is telling you they feel?
Well, for me, I'm blunt with players. No, it's a great question. I'm sure Eric's going to say the same thing. We've been doing this so long that when we ask a question, I feel like there's really teeth behind it. We're not mincing words. I want blunt honesty, right, wrong, and different, because as Eric will support, and this, Rob, obviously, that if we don't get true data, true feedback, we're in trouble. We really don't know what we're dealing with. So at least from my experience, I'm sure Eric's going to say the same. I'm sure you feel the same. This is a blunt conversation about anything. I mean, if I want to talk to somebody, I want honesty no matter what. And I feel like because of that, I think it's a cool concept. When you come from a really honest, open place, I feel like energetically that helps the other person also be very open and honest.
I think if you don't welcome an athlete's feedbacks as part of the training process, you're not just a bad coach, you're fundamentally negligent. It's information. And we spend, the professional level and certainly the private sector as well, hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars trying to acquire very objective measures of spin rate, velocity, extension, all these different things, when sometimes the single most important information you can gather is subjective feedback from an athlete of what they like, what they don't like, what worked, what didn't work. That information is invaluable to me.
Yeah. And I think we discount, like there are people that discount that. They discount the softer stuff and they focus solely on the stuff you can measure. And I think it's a really important point. And to the extent that you can actually put numbers behind it, I think that's where it suffers, right? I mean, that's where the biggest thing is there are no numbers here. So everybody defaults to the things that the programs that are, 120 feet, that has to be, that's an expert opinion. And that's a number that I can fall back on. Where this stuff is a little softer, it makes people a little less comfortable, but maybe the most important part of it.
It's like telling an athlete, like, you've got a banger curveball. You need to throw your curveball more often. All right, what happens when it's bases loaded, nobody out, and you're in a 2-2 count, you got to punch this guy out, but you don't trust your catcher to block that ball if it's a banger curveball in the dirt. Like, so your curveball is not good because you don't believe in it and you don't believe in him to block it. So there's information and there's information that is lacking in context.
I think that's exactly it. Like I had made this point, maybe to Tom House, I think, that the reason the mental game gets less focused sometimes is because there's less measurables and we're so caught up in analytics that sometimes we don't focus on the stuff that can't be measured as well. And if you were, it all of a sudden would come up here if there was some way to measure it.
One of the greatest scientists, I use this line all the time, one of the greatest scientists to ever walk the earth, Albert Einstein, often talked about the intuition, which is immeasurable. And so I keep thinking of Lance and trust what you feel, and did you say mental game, Rob? Did I hear mental game?
I did. Throwing you a bone.
Thank you. It comes back to this intuition. I feel like, as you said, you put it well, the numbers can really cloud us, and they're convenient, right? They make us feel like it's knowable, it's tangible, it's right there. But at the end of the day, it's just, look, this is my world. I mean, what I truly have believed my whole life. This is more about feel. It's more about intuition. It's more about instincts and listening to your body, listening to your arm. And that's not measured. Yes. I mean, maybe one day we'll be able to measure, we can measure some of it, like we can measure meditation, obviously, and research on that. But I think Eric put it best. At the end of the day, it's that information you're getting from somebody, like that's the goal. Like, to me, that's the goal. Other stuff can be very helpful and very beneficial, but at the end of the day, it's what's coming from the heart, the gut.
And I think some athletes need that. So to play devil's advocate, I think some athletes, when they see the 120, 150, they see a hard, fast program they could follow to the letter. there are people that do better in that situation. Maybe that makes them feel better, that they feel like they obeyed everything they could along the way. And then there are athletes that are totally intuitive that are just going to, kind of do it their way.
I would also add that, just as much as I think we're maybe encouraging people to be proactive on the reconditioning settings, I've seen it go the other way as well. And I think it would be irresponsible for us to not at least highlight that, is that, some athletes, they want to take their arm for a walk and they just don't know how to do it. Right. I've seen guys that play catch out to 120 and then all of a sudden they're at 300 the next day. It goes that way as well. You have to be, at least fundamentally aware of like how acute stressors fit in the context of chronic workload. You can't go 0 to 60 that fast. And that can definitely happen. And usually those are the guys that, we see a lot in like high school kids. I'm just seeing it over and over again. You take a high school kid and he goes back-to-back 100 pitch appearances, even on a 7-day rotation. Things don't work out well after that. There's always like a dip, whether it's actual symptoms or just like a market decline in performance the third time around. Like it's just a workload that high school kids mostly have not, learned to tolerate.
That's a brilliant point, Eric. And I'm going to just add a piece to it. I'm so glad you brought that up, because when you get past the interval throwing program, and as Eric said, you're into the reconditioning phase, and we go to lengths to talk about incremental, progressive buildup, slow and sure, and take your time, just like the interval throwing program. And so I think that was one of the most important things that came out of this today, is that just because you finish the ITP and I'm saying, okay, you have 4 weeks now to train, absolutely there has to be, a great approach to that. And there has to be an incremental approach. And you're just building off of what you did, in the ITP. But that also has to be a progression. It has to be monitored. You have to be aware of going 0 to 60. It's a slow build. That's why I like 4 weeks. You're only going from 150, technically, let's say, to 300 feet, for a bigger thrower, 330, 340. So it won't really take that long to get there. It might only take a week or 10 days. But I like the 4 weeks because I want this to be a very, very slow build where you are reconditioning slowly, building. So, Eric, that was just a really important point for Cressey.
He doesn't need any more points. Come on.
I know. We're going to give it one anyway.
We'll take it.
Yeah, he's got enough points. How hard fast do you feel that 4 weeks is? Because are all athletes created equal body strength? I mean, I assume there's some variability there, right? I mean, some athletes maybe longer than 4 weeks potentially.
I'm using 4 weeks, Rob. First of all, if the ITP at 150 is done, so I would say, or whether it's 180 or whatever the number is, it's technically done, meaning they're going to start, not that kids haven't been on the mound before that for other reasons, but they're technically at the point now where they're implementing in other words, according to the IPT, you're now ready to start integrating mound work. And from my experience, you might be 2 pens away from a live. You might be 10 days away from a live. You might be 2 weeks away from a game. And again, I can't say it's factually. That's sort of what maybe Eric can talk to that. I use 4 weeks, Rob, as like, give me 2 weeks. But I mean, 4 weeks to me is like a great buffer to just say, okay, you did the ITP, great. You have a great foundation now. Now let's just expand that. And again, I used the term earlier, let's just stack the base and open it up and free it up and get more athletic. And just find a happy place of just throwing again. And if it's 6 weeks, great. If it's 8, whatever the player needs to do a slow burn, I'm all about. But I'm just using 4 weeks, I guess, because look, if we started with a healthy arm from scratch, our buildup phase is about 4 to 5 weeks, meaning they're ready for their first bullpen after that 4 to 5 week buildup, assuming they're throwing 5 to 7 days a week. So I'm just using 4 weeks sort of as a buffer to say, hey, if nothing else, just give us that nice chunk post ITP. And man, that makes me feel so comfortable.
The longer you've been shut down, the longer it takes to ramp up. We've always heard for every day you've been shut down, it's 1 day to build back up to get off the mound. So it's going to be totally different for someone who's a 10-day IL stint versus someone who's, a 60-day or something along those lines.
Any other topics you want to touch on, either one of you two? Mr. Jager, I'm looking at you. Staring at you.
I just have sort of my summary.
I would love to hear that.
Well, not a summary, but I just wrote down sort of like tie it in a bow.
Closing arguments.
Closing statements.
Let's hear it.
Ironically, in front of the lawyer, right?
Yeah. All right.
And Eric knows that my dad's an attorney too, and my sister's a DA. So I got. I just wrote down two things that I thought of earlier. One is, I just hope we can start to reframe this idea of the return to throwing program, the ITP. It's just step one, and maybe. Again, for a 12-year-old, they're essentially pretty close, and they just need a couple more weeks to sort of free up and recondition more and build some volume and build some arc and range of motion and variability, get the body moving in different ways. But for the pre-surgery or pre-whatever it was rehab player that, let's say, gets out to 300 plus feet or even 250, I'm just saying stage 2 is now I'm going to steal that term from you, Eric, is the reconditioning part of the program. It's a month or 3 weeks or whatever it is.
Objection.
I'm sorry, did I lose you guys?
Nope, we're here.
It was so weird. Something happened there.
It was that 3 o'clock thing. We're just doing
It is 3 o'clock.
I thought Rob wasn't kidding, man.
Yeah, I just shut it off right at 3.
Talk about it.
No, I'm a robot, so I just powered down at 3. Yeah.
Woo!
I'll give you my closing arguments.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Let me
go.
Sorry.
Do your thing.
Sorry. No, I want all of yours. I just wanted to finish the IT. I still remember where I was at, believe it or not.
Yeah.
I just want for there to be it reframed as stage 1, ITP, stage 2, reconditioning. And as you said, Rob, that might be 2 weeks. It might be, I hope it's at least 4 weeks, that you have nothing but time. And the last thing is collaboration. Back to what you said about science and feel. Please, whatever walk of life you're in, empower the athlete. Listen to the athlete. Let the athlete know they're heard, so that this is a collaboration. Yes, you have science. Yes, you have history. So I'm not saying don't follow the protocols. I'm just saying that this has to be a collaboration. Sorry, Eric, it's all yours.
No, that was good. And I think I build on that is I was just going to say, know the rules before you break the rules, right? You don't have a seat at the table to be part of this discussion if you're not fundamentally aware of like what the injury was, what the timeline on that injury was. All those things are very important considerations. So you need to ask a lot of questions, do a lot of listening. And what you're going to find is that that's going to lead to that collaborative opportunity in conjunction with, diagnosing physicians, rehabilitation professionals, all that. And above all else, listen. The athlete's going to tell you most of what you need to know. And you really, your job is to process that information and interject where appropriate, and collaborate with them to pull something together that makes everybody feel comfortable.
How could folks contact you if they want to, or do you just not want to be contacted? I know you guys are big dogs here. We're just,
we're easy. Are you kidding? Eric and I, this is what we do, man. They can hit us up on DMs at Jaeger Sports on Twitter, jagersports.com. They can go to our info page and contact us there. But that's what we do. You do the same. And, when you get into this field of teaching, it's because you care. You really care about helping players optimize not only their careers on the field, but obviously more importantly off the field. So that's what we do. So if anybody has questions or follow-ups, probably the easiest is DM at Jaeger Sports on Twitter, but if they need to, they can always go to our website.
Yeah. It's at Eric Cressey on Twitter and Instagram. And then it's just ericcressey.com for the website. So I'm happy to help in any way I can.
Well, I just wanted to thank both of y'all because both of you are among my circle of go-to guys when I have any questions. So it's great to have y'all as resources. And I think it's important for the whole baseball community. So, big thumbs up to y'all and thank you so much.
Back at you, Rob. Thank you very much for having us.
Rob, thanks a million for having us. Eric, thanks for making time to do this too, man. This was really, I think, an important topic, and
got it.
I appreciate you guys doing this.
And if there's if you guys have anything else in the future that you want, any platform, I can do the show. I can do anything you want. Cool. It's totally cool. Good deal.
This is great.
Thanks, man. Enjoy your drink with your wife.
Yeah, thank you, man.
Tell your wife. We apologize.
Yeah, you're both better, so that's
yeah, good. Eric, by the way, sorry for cutting you off. I was on that roll, like, oh no, I got
you got quiet, and I was actually like, oh shit, did he ask me a question and I missed it or something like that? But you just paused, and I'm like, oh boy, Wi-Fi cut out or something. So
Rob, can you please? Rob, can you please cut out the me interrupting Eric, looking like?
Oh no, I'm going to actually highlight it.
Yeah, make it a good one, like an awkward pause.
Yeah, exactly.
Alan can awesome. Stop talking. Anyway,
take care,
guys.
Awesome.
Appreciate
Rob,
you guys. Enjoy your weekend.
Thank you. You too.
Thanks for doing this, guys.
We'll see you.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the CSP Elite Baseball Development Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd be thrilled if you'd consider subscribing to the podcast and leaving us a review to read on iTunes. We welcome your suggestions for future guests and questions. Just email elitebaseballpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you for your continued support, and we'll see you next episode.